She spent months helping her daughter plan the perfect wedding, quietly sewing the hem, choosing the flowers, even stepping back when asked. But on the morning of the big day, her daughter screamed across the bridal suite, "You ruined everything." Before, the mother had even opened the mysterious letter left on her pillow. What was in the envelope? Who sent it? And why did the whole room turn on her without explanation? This is the story of a mother erased from the most important day of her daughter's life, and the heartbreaking silence that followed. What if the version of you they remember isn't the truth? It was the kind of morning people write poems about. The kind where the air feels thin and light, and everything is touched by a softness you don't want to disturb. The hotel room was awash in ivory light, filtering through sheer curtains, casting delicate shadows across the carpet. Makeup brushes lay carefully arranged beside empty coffee cups. A curling iron hissed faintly in the bathroom. There was laughter in the hallway, bridesmaids, hairstylists, people rushing with purpose. Everyone was moving. Everyone was glowing. And I was standing by the full-length mirror, adjusting the corsage on my wrist, trying to make sure the flower petals didn't crush beneath the clasp. It was her day. That's what I kept telling myself. Her day, not mine, not ours, just hers. I repeated it like a quiet chant in my head as I pinned the last curl into place, smoothed the hem of her veil, and stepped aside when the photographer asked for just the girls. I smiled when they smiled, nodded when prompted. I didn't need to be the center. I hadn't been for years. Still, I felt good that morning. Nervous? Yes. A little achy from the heels. But proud. Proud that we had made it here. Through all the years, the changes, the silences. Proud that she had grown into someone brave enough to build a life of her own. I had spent most of the night writing and rewriting a small speech. In my mind, nothing formal. Something I'd say to her in the hallway. Just the two of us. A reminder that I loved her. That I was proud. That her mother would always be her first home. I was reaching for my purse when I saw it again. The envelope, cream-colored, my name in script that felt too familiar. It had been left on my pillow earlier that morning before I'd gone down for breakfast. No note attached, no context. It's just sealed. I hadn't opened it yet. I'd been meaning to. I thought maybe after the ceremony, when things had calmed. I didn't want to bring anything unexpected into the day. 'Twas her wedding. It's a time for ease, not inquiry. Then it happened. I don't remember a build-up. Just the sound. Sharp, full of a rage that seemed too large for the room. You ruined everything. The words ripped across the bridal suite like glass shattering on tile. I turned, confused, clutching my purse a little tighter. She was standing. Near the makeup table, veil pinned, eyes wild, mouth trembling not from sadness but fury. My daughter. The same one I had taught to read, to tie her shoes, to braid her hair. The same child I had walked to school in the rain with a broken umbrella. Our fingers red from cold and laughing anyway. Now she was pointing at me. You had. No, right? I froze, my hands still on the chair, my other still clutching the unopened letter. Around us, the room fell silent. No more laughter, no more clinking glasses. Just eyes. Dozens of eyes. The bridesmaids, the photographer, the makeup artist, all looking at me as if I'd dropped something heavy and sacred on the floor. I trusted you, she said, and her voice cracked not with sorrow, but disdain. I didn't move. I couldn't. My body had turned to something hollow, light and dense all at once, like paper soaked in water. I tried to open my mouth, to ask what she meant, to understand. But she turned her back before I could form a word. One of the bridesmaids reached out to place a hand on her shoulder. Someone else mumbled, "Let's just breathe," but it didn't matter. The moment had fractured the room, and I had become something else entirely. Not the mother helping her daughter prepare for the most important day of her life. Just the woman standing quietly in the wrong corner of the story. I left. I don't remember how I got to the hallway, only the feel of the door shutting behind me, my fingers shaking as I walked past strangers carrying bouquets, past the wedding planner who glanced at me, then quickly looked away. I made it to the end of the corridor and stood there, unable to cry, unable to think, just still. I had not even opened the letter, and yet somehow I had already been accused, already condemned. The corsage on my wrist slipped slightly. Adjusted it with trembling fingers, watching the petals bend under the pressure. And for the first time that day, I realized something had shifted, and I might not know how to get it back. Before everything cracked open, there had been quiet. That rare quiet that settles in the early hours before a celebration. I remember waking up just after 6, not to an alarm, but to a kind of stillness that didn't ask anything of me. The hotel room was dim, the light outside soft and gray-blue. For a moment, I didn't move. I just lay there, listening to the hum of the air conditioner and the occasional muffled hallway footstep. It was the kind of morning that reminded me of when she was little, how I used to wake before her, those few minutes of calm before the day began. I sat up slowly. My hands found the edge of the blanket and folded it back without thinking. The carpet was warm under my feet. I padded over to the small kitchenette, filled the kettle, and reached for the peppermint tea I had brought from home. It's a small ritual, something that reminded me of myself. The table was already set with the things I'd laid out the night before. The gift bag with the hand-stitched initials. A small travel sewing kit just in case. Her childhood locket, polished and placed inside. A soft velvet pouch. And the letter still unopened sat beside it. I had noticed it when I returned from breakfast yesterday. Folded into the crisp corner of my pillow, like part of the hotel's turned-down service. Except this wasn't from the hotel. There had been no note explaining where it came from. Just the envelope, my name on it, no return address. The handwriting was familiar enough to unsettle me, but I couldn't place it with certainty. I'd picked it up, turned it over once, then set it on the desk. I told myself I'd open it after the ceremony, after the cake, after the dancing. I didn't want anything to distract from the day she had spent months planning. If it was bad news, or even just unexpected, I didn't want to carry it into the bridal suite, into the makeup chair, into the moment she stepped into her gown. I didn't want to risk becoming a shadow in the middle of her light. After tea, I stood at the window and watched the city wake up. Delivery vans, a jogger in a neon vest, a woman walking her dog in a coat too thin for the breeze. I thought of the years we lived in a one-bedroom apartment across town. How we used to take Saturday walks, her small hand gripping mine, pointing at dogs, at clouds, at cracks in the pavement that looked like secret maps. Those mornings felt so far away now, not because they'd vanished, but because the space between us had grown in ways I didn't always know how to name. Still, I told myself today would be a good day. I'd done everything I could to make it one. I'd stayed out of the planning when asked, offered help only when needed. I wore the shoes she liked, the earrings she picked out on Etsy. I had even redone my makeup trial after she said. The first attempt was a little too bold. I wasn't angry about it, not really. I wanted her to have the day she imagined, the one she deserved. I had rehearsed what I might say to her while she got ready, just a sentence or two. Something simple, like, I'm proud of you. I hope this life you're building holds everything your heart needs. I never got to say it, but in that hour before everything broke open, I believed I still might. I checked my phone. Text from the florist confirming delivery. One from her, and asking if the hairdresser was running on time. Nothing from her yet, but that was fine. She had a schedule, people to see, rooms to move between. I didn't want to intrude, just wanted to be nearby, ready, useful. I laid out the dress I'd chosen, a soft slate blue, elegant, quiet. The kind of color you wear when you want to belong without drawing attention. I fastened the corsage gently around my wrist. Single rose, pale pink. It's the kind we used to plant in the backyard, back when she still lived at home. When she still asked me to tie her sash or fix her hair just right, I caught my reflection in the mirror as I turned. I looked the way I was supposed to, put together, composed. I took one last sip of tea, grabbed my purse, and tucked the letter back inside, just until later, because that morning I believed there would still be a later, a moment for words, a place for grace. And in that final, peaceful hour before voices rose and everything shifted, allowed myself the smallest hope that maybe, just maybe, love was still enough. The fabric was heavier than I expected, not in weight, but in memory. It draped across her frame like something sacred, and for a moment, I didn't move. I just stood there behind her, holding the zipper between my fingers, staring at the slope of her shoulders. She was looking at herself in the mirror, tilting her head slightly, adjusting the angle of her chin, pursing her lips to assess the final effect. She looked beautiful and unreachable. The room was full now. Hairdresser packing up curling irons, photographer adjusting lenses, bridesmaids flitting between makeup touch-ups and laughter. Someone dropped a lipstick cap and it rolled under the dressing table. Still, she didn't turn around. She waited for me to finish the zip without saying a word. I moved slowly, carefully. I didn't want to catch her skin or ask her to shift. I didn't want to disturb the atmosphere, which felt almost pressurized, like something could break if I made the wrong sound. I pulled the zipper up in one steady motion and let my hand linger for just a moment at the top, brushing a loose strand of hair from her neck. "Perfect," I said softly. It wasn't a compliment. It was a hope. A wish that she might feel it, not just the dress, but the moment. The history that lived in my hands. Because the last time I had zipped a dress for her, she was 16, rushing to a school dance, panicking about her eyeliner. And before that, 10, trying on a Halloween costume we'd made from old curtains. I had always been the one behind her, adjusting, fastening, smoothing. It had always been me. But today, she didn't smile at me in the mirror. She didn't say thank you. She stepped forward to examine the fall of the skirt and waved in the direction of one of her bridesmaids. "Can you grab the shawl?" she said, not even glancing back. I let my hands fall to my sides. The seam at the bottom of the dress had been sewn by me, not that anyone knew. She had mentioned offhandedly that the hem felt uneven when she walked, and I had offered to take a look. It was a quiet task when I did late at night, sitting on the edge of my hotel bed with the lamp turned low, the fabric pooled across my lap. I had stitched it in silence, every pass of the needle like a prayer. Let her feel supported. Let her feel loved. Let her know I'm here, even if I'm not always seen. But she didn't mention the fix, didn't acknowledge it. I watched as her bridesmaid placed the shawl over her shoulders, careful not to smudge the makeup. There were nods, half-laughs, adjustments. I stood to the side and watched the scene unfold like a guest who had arrived, early, unsure if they belonged. Still, I stayed near. That's what mothers do. The photographer asked for a shot of the girls. They grouped together quickly, arms around waists, bouquet arrangements held just so. "You too, Mom," one of them said politely. The kind of tone people use when they're including you because it would be too obvious not to. I stepped in, smiled. Not too wide. Just enough. The camera clicked. Once, twice, then someone said, "'Kay, now just the bridal party." And I stepped away without being told. Back by the mirror, I adjusted the small pin on my jacket. Her birthstone nestled in a silver setting, a Mother's Day gift from years ago. Probably didn't remember giving it, but I remembered receiving it. I remembered the way her small hands held the box, her eyes lit with pride. I had worn it every year since, whether she noticed or not. They say weddings bring people together. But I'm not sure that's true. I think sometimes they just reveal the distance that was already there. She was talking now, laughing at something. Her maid of honor whispered. Her voice had a brightness to it I hadn't heard in months. Not with me. Only with others. The kind of light you reserve for people you haven't learned how to be disappointed in yet. I wondered what she saw when she looked at me. A helper, a presence to manage. A figure to nod at, but not lean on. I used to be the person who knew what every expression on her face meant. Now, I wasn't sure if I could even name the shape of her sadness. Someone brought in her bouquet. There were gasps. Compliments. She held it high, inspecting it. "I love it," she said. "It's exactly what I wanted." I wanted to tell her I had helped pick the color of the ribbon, that I had called the florist to ask if peonies would still be in bloom, that I had chosen the shade of ivory wrapping because it reminded me of the way her blanket looked when she was a baby. But I didn't say any of that. I just stood back, adjusting my corsage again, and told myself to be proud. Because even if she couldn't see it, this dress had my stitches in it. My hands, my memory, my love. And no one could unmake that. Not even her. It had been sitting there since morning. No fanfare. No messenger. Just quietly placed on the edge of my pillow as if it had always belonged there. The envelope was cream-colored, uncreased, unremarkable, except for the handwriting, elegant, slanted, familiar. Not my daughter's, but familiar enough to stir something in my chest the moment I saw it. I picked it up, turned it over once, twice, held it up to the light as if I might see through it without opening it. I D'd on single quotes T. Instead. I tucked it into my purse and carried it with me for hours, through breakfast, through hair and makeup, through the small, careful silences between my daughter and me as we prepared for a day that had long been imagined. The envelope remained unopened, not because I forgot, but because something in me said, not now. I told myself I'd open it later, after the ceremony. When the vows had been said and the cake had been cut, I didn't want anything to complicate the day. And if there was one thing I had learned, especially in recent years, 'twas how quickly things could become complicated. So I let it sit. There was no return address, no note attached, just my name written on the front. It's my full name, not Mom, not Mother. That, too, told me something. I carried it like it was made of glass, as if the words inside could shatter if I moved too quickly. I felt its presence. The way you feel a pebble in your shoe, not painful, just persistent. A small reminder that something awaited me. A truth I hadn't asked for. A truth someone had chosen to send on her wedding day. There's a kind of fear that doesn't rise like panic. It settles instead. It takes root in the quiet corners of your body. I felt it as I reached for my lipstick, as I fastened the pin on my jacket. I watched my daughter pose for photos with people who had only recently learned how to pronounce her middle name. I learned long ago that motherhood was filled with moments of silence. Not because we have nothing to say, but because the time never feels quite right to say it. The envelope felt like the opposite of that silence, someone else's voice. Arriving uninvited, ready to speak, I kept trying to guess what might be inside. A memory, a warning, a confession. I thought of people from the past, distant relatives, estranged friends, names we hadn't spoken in years. I thought of stories I hadn't told her, stories she hadn't asked about, stories I had always intended to explain, just not yet. Maybe this letter was about one of them. Maybe it wasn't even about me. Maybe it was about her father, or about something that had never even belonged to us but had found its way in regardless. I felt the weight of it more than once as I moved through the bridal suite. It shifted in my purse every time I reached for something. Tissues, lip balm, the safety pin I always carried just in case. The envelope was always there, just beneath the surface. I remember thinking, irrationally, that if I didn't open it, maybe none of what was inside could touch the day. That if I kept it sealed, whatever it carried would stay quiet, contained, powerless. But letters don't lose power just because you delay reading them. They wait. And sometimes the longer they wait, the more they gather strength. Still, I waited. I watched as my daughter walked the room in her gown, receiving compliments, brushing off lint, arranging. her veil like a crown. I watched as she laughed with her friends, texted someone on her phone, whispered something to her maid of honor with her back turned toward me. There had been a moment, just one, where she looked in my direction and seemed like she might say something. Her eyes softened, her mouth opened slightly, but then she turned away again. The moment passed, so I kept the envelope sealed. I thought I was doing the right thing, giving space, protecting the day. I didn't know, not then, that the words I hadn't yet read were already unraveling something I couldn't name. Sometimes the damage doesn't come from the words themselves. It comes from their timing, from their delivery, from the way someone chooses to hand them to you when you're most exposed. I didn't open the envelope until after the ceremony, after the scream. After her voice echoed through the room and painted me in a shade I didn't recognize. By then, it didn't feel like a letter anymore. It felt like a match, and I was already on fire. It was a small thing at first, a whisper. That's how it always begins, doesn't it? Not with thunder, but with something quieter. Something easily missed unless you know what to look for. I had stepped out to use the restroom, just 5 minutes. Just long enough to breathe, to collect myself, to press a cool paper towel to the back of my neck. The bridal suite had been too warm, too filled with perfume and hairspray and nerves that didn't belong to me. I remember looking at myself, in the mirror above the sink, fixing a stray hair, reapplying lipstick, trying to hold on to the version of myself I had brought into that morning. When I came back, the door was slightly ajar. I heard laughter, a cork popping, the kind of celebratory chaos that fills the space before a big moment, and then quiet. A sudden hush, like someone had pressed pause. That's when I saw it. A bridesmaid, the one with the carefully curled hair, and the long silver earrings leaning into my daughter's ear, her hand cupped slightly around her mouth. I couldn't hear the words, only the tone low, urgent, meant not to travel. My daughter stilled, her back straightened. The hand that had been holding her bouquet dropped slightly. She didn't say anything right away. She just stared straight ahead, her face hardening inch by inch, like plaster setting. I paused outside the door, not wanting to intrude, not wanting to assume, but a mother knows. The shift was too sudden, too sharp. The bridesmaid stepped back quickly, her eyes darting toward the floor as if she hadn't just lit a fuse. My daughter turned slowly, deliberately, and scanned the room. She didn't have to search long. Her eyes landed on me in an instant, and that was when she said it. You ruined everything. Her voice wasn't loud at first. It didn't need to be. The room was already quiet. Everyone had heard. Everyone had stopped. Even the photographer, who had just been fiddling with a lens cap, froze in place. There was a beat, just one where I thought maybe she was joking, some over-the-top pre-wedding nerves, a misunderstanding. But then she said it again, louder. You had no right. This time, the words were not just loud. They were shaped with heat, with conviction. And with hurt, I took a step into the room, clutching the strap of my purse tighter. What? What do you mean? She shook her head, and I saw it in her eyes. Whatever it was, whatever she believed, I wasn't going to be allowed to explain. You promised you wouldn't. You said you wouldn't do anything today, that you'd just show up and sit quietly. That's what you said. Her voice cracked on the last sentence, and she blinked hard, as if she might cry but refused to let it happen. Here, in front of everyone, I looked around the room. No one moved. No one offered context. Not the bridesmaid who had whispered. Not the maid of honor standing by the door with her hand pressed to her mouth. Everyone stood still, watching a scene unfold. Like it was a performance they hadn't paid for but couldn't look away from. I felt the shift in my body. Before my mind could make sense of it, shame. Not because I had done anything, but because I had been accused loudly, publicly. I don't know what you're talking about, I said. My voice came out too quiet, too flat. She turned away from me then, spoke not to me, but to the room. She always does this. She always. makes it about her. The words didn't strike like daggers. Daggers would have been easier, cleaner. These were something else, like slow acid, dismantling things that had once felt solid. I felt the eyes on me again, people I didn't know. Well, people I had sent thank you notes to, people I had smiled at over appetizers the night before. And none of them looked at me now with kindness, only caution. The way you look at someone who might break something if you get too close. I didn't stay to defend myself. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't plead. I backed out of the room slowly, nodding once, as if I understood, as if this was always going to happen. And in a way, maybe I had known. Not the specifics, not the sting, but the truth that had been simmering between us for years. The one we both ignored because naming it might undo us. Outside in the hallway, I let my breath out, one long, slow exhale. My hand found the envelope. Again, buried deep in my purse. Still sealed. Still unopened, but no longer quiet. The hallway outside. The bridal suite was filled with flowers. Tall arrangements perched on golden stands, clustered roses and peonies spilling out like something alive. Everything smelled faintly of lavender and eucalyptus, the scent both calming and, in that moment, suffocating. I stood still among them, a statue pressed into the scenery, invisible in a hallway I had helped design. I had worked with the florist myself. Months ago, on a quiet afternoon when my daughter had been too busy to attend the final walkthrough, I'd gone in her place, brought her color swatches, her Pinterest board, her notes written in cursive on a yellow legal pad. Soft, romantic. She had written, nothing too bold. Nothing that draws attention to itself. I remember reading that line twice, and now I stood alone, surrounded by those soft, romantic flowers. And all I could think was how quickly a moment can collapse. How one sentence, 5 words, really can dismantle a day that took months to build. You ruined everything. It echoed louder in memory than it had in the room. Out here, away from the eyes and the makeup and the carefully arranged place settings. The words had room to grow. I didn't move. My feet remained rooted to the carpet, my fingers still holding the strap of my purse. The envelope pressing into my side like it had weight. A few hotel staff passed by, each offering a polite nod. But no second glance. Maybe they didn't know. Maybe they hadn't heard. Or maybe I had already learned how to become invisible quickly enough. Through the frosted glass of the suite door, I could still hear movement. Voices rising again. Music playing from someone's phone. Laughter. It all sounded too normal, too. Practiced. Like the scream had never happened. Like I hadn't just been pushed out of a room I helped create. I wanted to sit, but there was nowhere to go. Just standing tables covered in small vases and name tags waiting to be distributed. I ran my hand over the edge of one table, careful not to disturb anything. I had promised not to disturb anything. The dress I wore was starting to itch at the collar. The corsage had tilted sideways. I adjusted it again, as if realigning the rows might also realign the moment. It didn single quotes T. Behind me. Someone opened a door. Kay turned instinctively, but it was a guest. A woman I didn't recognize. She gave me a brief, tight smile, the kind you offer to someone you think might be in the way. I stepped aside automatically, heart racing, though I didn't know why. Everything inside me wanted to ask what had happened, what had changed. Had been said in that whisper, but I already knew the answer. Not the words, but the shape of the shift. It had been coming for a while. You can only hold something fragile for so long before it slips, or is taken from your hands. I thought of all the years I'd told myself this day would be different. That whatever distance had grown between us, today would be the place where it ended. I had imagined us laughing, maybe even crying. I'd imagined a private moment in the dressing room where I would tuck a strand of hair behind her ear and say, "You're ready." And she would know I meant more than the dress, but that moment never came. Instead, I was here, frozen among the flowers, watching the celebration move forward without me. A staff member passed with a clipboard and didn't look twice. A man adjusted a speaker. Two bridesmaids burst from the room with a burst of perfume and hurried steps, their heels clicking in unison. One looked at me, hesitated, then said nothing. I realized then no one was coming after me. No one was going to explain. No one was going to ask if I was okay. And somehow that was the loudest silence of all. I reached into my purse again, touched. The envelope still sealed, still waiting. I wondered what would be worse, opening it and knowing, or leaving it closed and wondering. But I didn't open it, not yet. Instead, I stepped back against the wall. Let the flowers surround me. Let the music and the voices drift by. I stayed there until I was no longer part of the story, part of the background, frozen in flowers, waiting for something that might never return. There is a particular kind of silence that follows public humiliation. It isn't the absence of sound, it's the presence of judgment. A thick, unspoken wall that builds itself between you and everyone else. I didn't slam the door behind me. I didn't cry or raise my voice or ask the question I most wanted to ask. Why? Instead, I walked not quickly, not dramatically, just forward. Each step quieter than the last. The corridor stretched long ahead of me, carpeted in soft gray, lined with abstract paintings I didn't remember passing earlier. There were doors on either side, ballrooms, meeting spaces, private lounges each, one holding other stories. Happy ones, maybe. Uncomplicated ones. Mine trailed behind me like a train I hadn't asked to wear. My heels made almost no sound on the carpet, but I felt each step rattle through me. The weight of everything I didn't understand. The accusation, the letter. The distance between who I thought I was and how she clearly saw me. A staff member, carrying a clipboard, walked past and offered a brief smile. It's one of those polite, professional expressions that doesn't ask or acknowledge. I returned it barely. My mouth moved, but I don't know if it resembled a smile. I passed the arrangement. Table next. Place cards, alphabetized, floral sprigs tucked beside each name. My name was there, printed in gold, mother of the bride. It glimmered under the hallway light, positioned perfectly beside a small favor bag tied in silk ribbon. A delicate gesture, one I had helped design months ago. I reached for it, then stopped. Something about touching it felt too final, too desperate. I let my hand fall and moved on. The elevator at the end of the hallway was empty. The mirror inside reflected a version of me I didn't recognize. My hair was still pinned neatly. Her lipstick was intact. But something about my eyes, something quiet and fractured, had changed. I pressed the button for the lobby without thinking. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay in the hallway, couldn't hover like a misplaced guest in my own daughter's story. The doors opened to the soft hum of piano music drifting from the cocktail lounge. Guests were already gathering in small clusters, holding glasses, exchanging pleasantries. I stepped into the marble-floored lobby and blended as best I could. No one seemed to notice. No one looked twice, and that was when it landed. The realization that this wasn't an intermission. I wasn't taking a breath before returning to my seat. I had been dismissed. Not by a vote, not by request, but by silence. I found a bench tucked near the wall. Wooden, uncomfortable, the kind usually meant for decoration. I sat anyway. My hands folded in my lap, my purse still at my side. The envelope was still inside. The weight of it seemed heavier now, though I knew that was impossible. Words don't weigh more once they've hurt you, but they feel like they do. I thought about opening it right there in the lobby among strangers, but I couldn't bring myself to. Not in public. Not in a space where someone might glance over and see my face shift into something I hadn't prepared. Instead, I sat with it, sat with everything. With the image of her turning from me, with the echo of her voice raised not in fear, not in confusion, but in accusation. With the knowledge that my role, however carefully I'd played, it had been rewritten without my consent. A wedding staff member approached at one point. A young man, maybe in his 20s, in a black suit and earpiece. "Ma'am," he said softly, "are you all right?" I nodded before he could finish the question. Just resting my feet, I said, a lie, but not entirely untrue. He smiled. Kindly. "Of course," he said, then turned away. I watched him walk back toward the elevator, probably off to deliver a message or adjust a schedule or make someone else's day smoother. And I thought, there is no schedule for what happens. When a mother is no longer needed, there was no formal dismissal. No announcement, just that look, that sentence, that absence of grace, and now here I was sitting on a bench that hadn't been meant for me, trying to find a way to still belong to a day that had moved on without me. I didn't cry, didn't check my reflection. I didn't try to call anyone. I just sat, and for the first time that day, I realized the walk out of that room hadn't been the hardest part. It was realizing no one was going to ask me to come back. They were everywhere now. Guests trickling in with carefully styled hair and polished shoes, glancing down at place cards and sipping from fluted glasses. The air smelled faintly of citrus and linen, the kind of curated fragrance that wedding planners choose for elegance. The music was soft and pleasant instrumental covers of songs that once meant something louder. Someone laughed across the room. Someone else clinked a glass. And I stood near the edge of it all, holding the strap of my purse like it might anchor me to the floor. I didn't know where to go. There was no formal place assigned for a mother who had just been uninvited in the middle of a celebration. My name was still printed on the program. Mother of the bride in a delicate script beneath a short paragraph I had helped write. But none of that seemed to matter now. I saw them start to arrive in clusters, her friends from college, distant cousins, neighbors we hadn't spoken to in years. They moved through the space with ease, hugging, complimenting each other's outfits, remarking on how beautiful the venue was. I caught pieces of conversations as I passed. "The flowers are incredible. Did you see her dress? There, such a perfect match." No one looked my way, not really. Some glanced, and when they did, it was fleeting. An acknowledgement maybe, but not an invitation. One woman I vaguely remembered from a PTA meeting years ago nodded as we passed near the bar. Her eyes flicked away before I could return the gesture. A man I knew from her father's Sidan uncle perhaps gave me the kind of smile people offer to someone they think they should recognize but aren't sure from where it was, as though I had been erased without being removed. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was too aware of how easily people mirror the energy around them. My daughter's shift toward me had been loud enough to register, even if the guests hadn't heard the words. They felt it. The way people feel a crack in the floor even before they see the fault line. I stood for a while near the edge of the main room, close enough to see the ceremony chairs being arranged, but far enough not to be asked if I wanted to help. Someone from the wedding staff passed by with a clipboard, paused to read a seating chart, and then adjusted a name card. I saw my name again, still there. No one had moved it, and yet I knew I wouldn't sit in that seat, because the person that name belonged to the version of me that had been expected. No longer matched the one standing in that room. I walked toward the corner near the tall windows. The light was softer there. Outside, the lawn had been cleared and decorated with rows of white chairs facing an arch wrapped in flowers. I could see the aisle she would walk down. The aisle I would not. A group of guests stood nearby, sipping cocktails. I recognized two of them from my daughter's childhood mothers of her school friends. We had once chaperoned field trips together, shared awkward birthday parties in bowling alleys and community pools. I caught one of them looking at me now. She smiled quickly and said nothing. The other touched her arm, whispered something, and they both turned away. It wasn't malicious. It was just ... careful, They didn't want to be involved in something they didn't understand. They didn't want to choose sides in a story they hadn't heard, and no one had heard mine. It struck me then how easily a woman can be turned into a complication. How a mother can become an inconvenience just by existing outside the edges of someone else's plan. I wasn't loud. I hadn't caused a scene, okay? I had left the room when asked Tiff, not in words, then in tone. I had done what I believed was right, and still I had become the thing to avoid. The envelope remained in my purse, pressing against my side like a second spine. I hadn't touched it since sitting on that bench. But I felt its presence, felt its warning. The ceremony was starting. Soon, the coordinator's voice called out instructions. Ushers began guiding guests toward their seats. Small bell rang from the entrance. It's calling people to attention. I didn't move. A young woman walked by. Someone I didn't know. She looked at me and paused. For a moment, I thought she might say something. Her expression shifted, uncertain. Then she smiled kind, small, and brief and walked on. It was the first time that day someone had looked at me like I was still part of it all. But even that kindness wasn't enough to make me step back into the center. Because the center wasn't mine anymore. And the people around me, these guests who didn't meet my eyes, weren't cruel. They were just reading the room, and I apparently was no longer on the page. It was nearly dark by the time I opened it. The reception had started. The music was louder. Now some familiar pop song filtered through speakers that echoed across the lawn. Glasses clinked. Someone shouted to the bride and groom, and was met with laughter and applause. I sat alone. In the hotel room, the envelope resting in my lap like something fragile and long overdue. The room was still dressed in its morning softness, though the light had changed. The makeup wipes I'd used hours earlier sat crumpled on the counter. A pair of pearl earrings I never got around to wearing glinted near the sink. My corsage lay beside the lamp, its petals wilted, one leaf already curled at the edge. I took a breath and reached into my purse. The envelope wasn't heavy, but it had a weight. It's the kind that builds not from the paper, but from the silence you've let sit too long. I traced the edge with my thumb before finally, slowly breaking the seal. Inside was a single folded page. The paper thick, slightly textured, no greeting, no date. It's just a name scrawled at the top, not mine. Hers, my daughter's. And the words beneath it, not in her handwriting, written someone else's. A hand I hadn't seen in a very long time. My heart thudded before I could process the first sentence. It was from someone I hadn't expected. Someone she had only known through stories pieced together from years of cautious omission. Her father's sister. My former sister in law. The letter wasn't long, but it was sharp. It cut with the precision of someone who had waited for years to say what they thought, and chose this moment, this date, to finally say it. It spoke of truths long hidden, of the pain your mother never accounted for. It referenced years she was not present for choices she had only heard about secondhand. And yet she wrote as if her knowledge was fact, as if her presence in my daughter's life, distant as it was, gave her clarity that I had somehow missed. She spoke of my leaving, of the divorce, of how some people walk away because it's easier than staying and working through things. She wrote that she had kept quiet for my daughter's sake. But now that you are becoming a wife, she continued, you deserve to know the kind of woman your mother is. You deserve to go into this next chapter with full understanding. I stopped reading. My hands shook, but not with rage. With something older, something I had buried and made peace with years ago. This wasn't about truth. It was about timing, about a bitterness that had waited for the most fragile moment to uncoil. It had waited until I was already tired, already out of the room, already positioned as the problem. And now it had been handed to her like a favor, a warning wrapped in concern. I reread the final line. Sorry you had to learn it this way. But I believe you deserve to start your marriage without illusions. No signature, no name. Just a long dash, as if the words were meant to echo. Into silence, I folded the letter carefully, pressing the crease down with trembling fingers. I didn't tear it, didn't crumple it. I simply placed it back in the envelope, set it on the nightstand, and stared out the window. I could hear their celebration now. Her voice carried over the music, laughing, maybe thanking someone for a gift or a compliment. The same voice that had once called for me in the dark after a nightmare. The voice that once said, "Don't leave yet," when I tucked her in. I wondered what part of her believed that letter. What part had been waiting to believe it? And then I wondered something else. Had she given it to me so I could see what was said about me? Or had someone else slipped it into my room before she had the chance? Either way, it had been read, and it had done what it came to do. Not destroy me. No, I was still here, breathing, sitting upright, but it had made something fall out of place. Not just today, not just the ceremony, something deeper, something that had taken years to hold together. With tenderness and small sacrifices and words left unsaid, the letter had been short, but its silence afterward would be long. I poured myself a glass of water and sat back on the edge of the bed, palms resting flat on the blanket. She was dancing now, I imagined, in a white dress I had helped pay for, with a man I hoped would protect the parts of her that had once been so fragile, and I still her mother. Still the keeper of bedtime stories and science projects and soccer cleats was now the footnote. Someone else had rewritten. The letter was finally open, and so was a wound I didn't know was still there. I hadn't said his name out loud in over a decade. Not because I was angry, not because I wanted to pretend he never existed, but because there's some names that carry more than memory. Very weight. They carry history that never quite finishes unfolding. And sometimes, saying the name out loud feels like stepping backward through a door you'd long since locked. But there it was, in ink, centered in the second paragraph of the letter, as if speaking it again would make it a kind of truth. Daniel, my daughter's father. It wasn't a name she used often either. She had grown up with pieces of him photos, stories, occasional calls that dwindled after the first few years. And I had never hidden him, not truly. I just hadn't handed her everything. Not the full version, not the unedited cut. Because how do you explain to a child that love isn't always enough? That sometimes safety comes at the cost of story. He hadn't been cruel, not in the ways people recognize. He had been unpredictable, quiet in the wrong moments, loud when silence was needed. He made promises generously and forgot them with equal ease. I spent years explaining away his absences. He's working late. It's tired. He meant well. I lied small. Lies to keep her belief in him intact. And then, one day, I stopped lying. Not loudly, just gradually. One missed birthday too many. One voicemail too short. One visit postponed until even she stopped asking when he'd show up again. By then, I had moved us into a smaller place, started over, kept our routines tight. Her bedtime steady, our holidays filled with predictability. I didn't speak badly of him. I just stopped filling in the blanks. Left behind. But someone else had picked up the thread. The letter had mentioned him as if the story had remained. Static, untouched, unweathered. Daniel always tried to reach out. It claimed, he told me how hard it was, how much you wanted to be there, how you made it difficult. Difficult, that word hit harder than any insult. 'Twasn't harsh. 'Twas, worse, it was dismissive. It reframed survival as resistance. Made my boundaries sound like barriers. It turned the quiet strength it took to raise a child alone into something selfish. I remembered the nights I sat by the phone, willing it to ring so she wouldn't have to ask, did he forget again? I remembered taking double shifts so I could afford the ballet recital costume he'd promised to buy and never did. I remembered the way she curled against me after those long days, her breath warm on my collarbone as she whispered, just you and me. And now, someone who hadn't seen either of us in years had written a version of the story where I was the reason he disappeared. I set the letter down again, this time face down on the nightstand. I stared at the name. Not written, but still visible in my mind. The way it used to sound when she said it, tentative, hopeful. The way it eventually faded from her vocabulary altogether. Had she forgotten those years? Or had someone simply handed her a simpler explanation? I stood and walked slowly to the closet, opened the door, and stared at the garment bag hanging inside. Her backup dress. The one we'd picked together when she was afraid the first choice might be too formal. We had spent an entire afternoon trying on dresses, laughing at the dramatic ones, twirling in the mirrors like it was pretend. I remembered how she stood on tiptoe to kiss my cheek and whispered, "You're still my favorite person," as we walked to the register that was only 3 years ago. Now she had a new version of the past. One where her mother made it difficult. One where a name like Daniel could be resurrected and rebranded as something noble, something tragic. I didn't hate him. I never had. I just knew who he was. And I had learned the hard way that knowing someone clearly is not the same as condemning them. I sat again, the hem of my dress brushing against my ankles. The music from the reception drifted upward. The rhythm of joy in another room, and I for a moment said his name quietly. Just once. Daniel. It didn't feel sharp. It didn't feel sacred. It felt distant. It's like a language I no longer spoke fluently. I didn't say it with longing. Didn't say it with bitterness. I said it to remind myself that I had survived. Him and I had raised a daughter through that survival. No letter would ever unwrite that. He was just a detail in the background that morning. A professional, paid, quiet, unobtrusive. One of those people you barely notice because they're trained to disappear behind the lens. He moved through the bridal suite with practiced ESO-adjusting light, giving gentle direction, crouching low to capture a candid shot, standing on chairs to get the flat lay of the bouquet and invitation suite. But when everything happened, when my daughter screamed and the world shifted, he was there, standing near the vanity, camera in hand. Frozen like the rest of us. I hadn't thought of him until now, hours later. With the letter folded and silent on the nightstand and the party continuing without me, I thought of the photographer, of the moment right before her words cut through the room, of his finger resting near the shutter, the possibility that the very instant she turned toward me and said, "You ruined everything," he may have captured it. Photographs lie less than people do. They don't soften edges, they don't rewrite tone, they don't pick sides. If his camera had been raised, there might be an image of me standing in that doorway. Corsage slightly askew, hands still clasping my purse, eyes wide with confusion. And something deeper, not shock, not even pain, just ... recognition, a look that said, "Ah, so it's finally arrived." There might be a photograph of her too, in her dress, her hair perfectly styled, face flushed not with happiness, but heat, accusation held tightly in the set of her jaw, and everyone else frozen mid-movement, lipstick in hand. Champagne bottle in mid-tilt, that one bridesmaid looking down guiltily. The others, unsure whether to intervene or step back. A scene that wasn't part of anyone's shot list. I imagined him reviewing the files later, scrubbing through thumbnails on his computer, sorting joy from chaos. Wondering what to do with the frame that didn't belong. Would he delete it? Would he keep it? Would he see in my face what no one else had stopped to read? Photographers are trained to find light, chase it across shoulders, lace, glass, but they also see shadow. The things the rest of us move too fast to notice. A glance that lasts a fraction too long. A smile that doesn't quite meet the eyes. I wondered what he had seen that morning before the scream, before the whisper, before my daughter's whole posture shifted and I was recast as the villain in a story I didn't know we were telling. Had he seen her pause? Had he seen the whisper? Did he see the moment she stopped being my daughter and became someone else? Or did it all happen too quickly, even for his lens? I don't know why I kept thinking about it. Maybe because, in a room where words had failed me, an image might have told the truth. Maybe because part of me wanted to be able to point to something and say, look, see, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I just stood there. Or maybe because I feared what the image might reveal, some tilt in my mouth, some flicker of resentment, some echo of the thousand small things that go unspoken between mothers and daughters for years, till one day they bloom all at once. Photographs. After all, don't lie. But they don't explain either. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands resting lightly in my lap, and imagined a black and white version of the morning. A single shot. No filter, no caption. Just a moment suspended between what came before and what came after. And somewhere, in the folders on that photographer's memory card, maybe it still lived. Maybe one day my daughter would see it buried deep in the files, unedited, unnamed. And maybe she would pause. Just long enough to wonder what she had really seen that day. What she had really said. What I had really done or not done. But until then, I remained off-frame, cropped from the memory. A shape that no one noticed, even when standing still in the middle of the room. And the photographer, he had already moved on, capturing the next smile, the next dance, the version of the day they would want to remember. Not the truth, just the light. She hadn't spoken when it happened. Not during the scream, not when the room fell into its stunned hush. And not even as I stepped out with the weight of something irreversible in my chest. But I saw her, standing off to the left, holding a spool of ribbon in one hand, her other hand resting gently on the edge of the vanity. She didn't flinch. She didn't rush to console. She simply watched. And when our eyes met just for a second, hers didn't dart away like the others. It was enough to stay with me. Her name was Marin. She wasn't a childhood friend. Not a college roommate. She was newer, someone my daughter had grown close to during her first job out of school. A quiet one. The type who helped behind the scenes. Who carried emergency stain remover in her clutch and kept tissues tucked in. Her bouquet for others to use. She wasn't the loudest in the group, but she saw more than most. I remembered how she held the dress earlier, making sure the train didn't drag on the suite floor. I remembered the way she gently lifted my daughter's veil and straightened it, hands steady, not rushed. She did everything carefully, without seeking praise. And now, hours later, her face remained the only one I could remember clearly from that moment, when I returned briefly to the suite to collect my things after the ceremony. Long after the owl had been walked and the vows exchanged, Marin was there. The room was mostly empty, scattered with garment bags and stray lipsticks. Music from the reception carried faintly through the walls. A corsage was still on the side table, wilted and forgotten. She stood near the corner mirror, adjusting her hairpin. She turned when she saw me, and this time she didn't look away. There was a pause between us. Not uncomfortable, just suspended. I moved toward the chair where I'd left my shawl, and she stepped back, giving me space, saying nothing. Then, after a long silence, she spoke. She read it. Moran said quietly. I didn't pretend not to know what she meant. I didn't ask who. I didn't ask what. I simply looked at her, waiting. She got the letter 2 nights ago, she continued. It was slipped under her door at the hotel. She told me about it yesterday morning. I nodded slowly. Did she say what it was? Only that it was about you, that it was something she needed to know. Her voice was soft, but not unsure. She wasn't apologizing. She wasn't defending. She was quiet for a long time after, she added. Didn't cry, didn't get angry, just changed. I sat on the edge of the chair, folding the shawl over my arm. Did you read it? I asked. Maren shook her head. She didn't offer. And I didn't ask. I studied her face, calm, open. No fear, no avoidance. Just a kind of stillness I hadn't seen in anyone else that day. She trusts you, I said. She did. She answered, and I still trust her. But I also saw your face when she said it. The room went quiet again. I don't think it's about the letter, she added. Not entirely. I think it was something that had been building for a while. Something neither of you said. I looked down at my hands, thumb tracing the edge of my wedding band. Not mine anymore, technically, but I had never taken it off. A habit, a keepsake, a memory that hadn't quite worn thin enough to let go. You don't have to explain, Marin said gently. I just thought you should know. She didn't plan to say it. It wasn't rehearsed. She was nervous that morning, quiet, almost shaky. I think the letter tipped something. I let out a long breath. Thank you. For what? For not pretending you didn't see? Marin gave a small nod, then turned back toward the mirror. Sometimes we don't know what we're holding until someone puts words to it, she said, even if those words don't belong. She adjusted her dress strap and picked up a clutch from the counter. She'd come around. She added, not as comfort, but as fact. Maybe not today, but one day. When she's ready to look at it from all sides, I didn't respond. Didn't have to. She gave me one last glance, soft, measured. Then slipped out the door, and for the first time all day, I felt seen. Not forgiven, not redeemed, just seen, and in that quiet flower-scented room. It was enough. The applause was loud, but it was the song that reached me first. The opening notes were slow, familiar, one of those ballads that plays at almost every wedding. The kind written for moments like this. Voice low and steady, singing about holding on, letting go. Love that changes, but doesn't fade. I wasn't in the ballroom. I was upstairs again, in the same chair by the window, barefoot now, the edge of my dress tucked beneath my legs. The envelope still sat on the nightstand, unopened again. Not because I hadn't read, it because I had, and once was enough. It didn't matter how many times I returned to the words. They wouldn't rearrange themselves. They wouldn't soften, but the song. The song drifted up through the open window, carried on the laughter and clinking glass from the party below. I didn't have to look to know what was happening. The mother-son dance, I had seen the name on the program. Smother, my daughter's new mother-in-law, had her own paragraph, thanking her for raising a man of kindness and strength. I don't begrudge that. He was kind, he was steady. I liked him, and his mother had always been gracious. The few times we spoke, she was polite, warm, even deferential. But she was present, consistently. And that, in the end, made all the difference. I imagined the scene, the two of them stepping into the center of the floor. Her hand on his shoulder, his arm gently around her back. Guests gathered around, some dabbing their eyes, others swaying along. A camera circling them slowly, catching the way she smiled up at him. A son she had guided, taught, protected, and me, upstairs. Listening, I thought about all the weddings. I'd been to where the mother-daughter dance was skipped. Less traditional, maybe? Or too emotional. Okay, but I had imagined one for us once, quietly. Just a short song. One she loved as a child. Maybe something from the kitchen radio we used to sing along to while baking. Nothing extravagant. Just a moment. One final thread between the years we'd lived. Inside each other's orbits. But she hadn't wanted one, and I hadn't insisted. Now I understood why the dance below went on. The music didn't rush. The lyrics spoke of seasons, of watching someone grow, of stepping aside with grace. I wondered if she felt that his mother. She sensed the shift as her son moved toward a life that wouldn't need her in the same way. Or if she simply held the moment gently, without the ache of being cast out. I didn't envy her. But I did observe the contrast. There's a difference between stepping back and being pushed away. One carries dignity. The other, silence. Outside, the window, the lights around the garden flickered on. Little golden orbs strung between trees, illuminating the path I'd walked earlier. The chairs had been cleared, the arch dismantled. The flowers already wilting beneath the evening humidity. The music faded into applause, and I sat with the echo. Not jealous, not bitter, just outside of it all. It's a strange thing to watch a family form while feeling yourself being quietly uninvited from it. There was no announcement, no final word. It's just this subtle reordering of roles. Her father would give a toast. I knew. He always had the right words. It's the right timing, and I wouldn't be mentioned. Not because they had forgotten me, but because remembering me complicated the story they wanted to tell, that I had been there since the beginning, that I had stayed when it got hard, that I had cleaned up the pieces after each broken promise, that I had filled every silence he left behind. None of that made it into the program. None of that played in the background of their dance. Still, listened. Because some part of me, however small, still wanted to know what kind of love she would be surrounded by now. Even if it wasn't mine. Even if I wasn't asked to stand near it, and when the applause faded again, I whispered softly into the stillness of the room, as if my voice might reach no one but the memory of a little girl with untied shoes and cake on her cheek. I hope you feel held. Not by me, but by someone, anyone. I had spent weeks choosing it. Not because it was extravagant, wasn't, but because I wanted it to mean something. Something simple, something lasting. It's a kind of gift that doesn't get lost in a sea of blenders and towel sets. I'd found it in a small shop tucked between a used bookstore and a florist. The kind of place where everything had a story. And nothing came with a BARCOD. It was a wooden keepsake box, handmade, carved with delicate vines around. The lid and lined with soft blue velvet. Inside, I placed a note. It's just a few lines written, in my neatest script, for the quiet things, the small moments, the pieces you'll want to keep even if no one else sees them. Love, Mom. I remember holding it in both hands at the counter, hoping it wouldn't feel too sentimental, hoping she would see it not as a gesture of nostalgia, but as something grounding. A place to tuck away ticket stubs, a pressed flower from the honeymoon, maybe a scrap of ribbon from her bouquet, a place for memory. I had wrapped it myself, choosing paper the color of soft stone and tying it with thin twine instead of ribbon. Something understated, thoughtful. I tucked a sprig of dried lavender beneath the knot. She used to press lavender under her pillow as a teenager, said, it helped her sleep. It was supposed to be waiting for her in the bridal suite. I had asked the coordinator to place it where she would see it after the ceremony. No fanfare, no announcement. It's just a box with her name on a small white tag. But now, I wasn't sure if she'd opened it or if she'd even seen it, back in the hotel room. The second box sat on the dresser, a matching one. Not identical. This one had a different pattern along the edge, more circular, more floral. It had been meant for him, the groom. I hadn't planned to write a long note, just something small. Take care of each other. Keep the good things close. I hadn't wrapped his yet. Now I wouldn't. I sat on the edge of the bed, both boxes resting in my lap. One for a daughter I no longer recognized. One for a man I trusted more than she realized. And I wondered, quietly, if gifts given in love could still carry warmth when received in confusion. I didn't want it back. That wasn't why I thought about it now. I didn't need her to come knocking on my door, apology in hand, asking if I still had it. But I did want her to understand, not today, maybe not even this year. But one day, perhaps, she would lift the lid and read the words again. Or, for the first time. And something in her would soften, because I hadn't chosen it to prove a point. I hadn't written that note to be remembered. I had written it because even in the most painful moments, I still wanted to protect her joy, to give her something small and still, while everything else rushed forward. I traced the edge of the unwrapped box now, the one that would stay with me. I thought about placing my own things inside, the corsage, a program, the letter folded and worn at the edges, maybe even a photo, if I ever managed to get one from the day. But I hadn't taken any pictures, and I hadn't been included in any, so maybe the box would stay empty. A mirror to the other one given, one kept. I carried the unwrapped box to the desk and placed it inside my suitcase. I left the other where it was, still resting in her bridal suite, if she hadn't already moved it. Still tied with lavender, still holding the weight of all the things I didn't know how to say out loud. When the time comes. I hope she opens it, and if not, if it's set aside, forgotten in a drawer, or left behind in the honeymoon rush, hope someone, someday, tells her that I wrapped it with both hands, that I chose it carefully, that it came not from obligation, but from the last place in me, that still believed we were okay. By the time the toast began, I was no longer expected. I watched from the window, light from the reception canopy casting a soft glow on the lawn. Rows of tables wrapped in white linen, flickering candles lined up like tiny beacons. Plates half finished, champagne poured again and again into fluted glasses held too high. The air buzzed with a kind of fullness I used to associate with family, but not tonight. The microphone passed from hand to hand. Couldn't hear the words clearly from my room, but I recognized the cadence, the rise and fall of practiced humor. The pause for emotion, the voice cracking just enough to signal sincerity. I'd heard it at other weddings. The groom's best friend tells a story about a camping trip gone wrong. The sister chokes up remembering late-night talks. A parent offers a piece of advice too old-fashioned to be useful, but too heartfelt too. Dismiss, and then it was her father's turn. I could tell from the hush, the way the crowd settled. It always had that effect, charismatic, measured. His presence filled a room even when his voice was low. The kind of man people leaned in to hear. I hadn't seen him in years. We'd stopped attending the same events when it became easier for everyone. He had remarried quickly, a woman with a firm smile and a fondness for matching seasonal napkins. Our daughter never called her mom, but she never had to. The woman played her part well enough without the title. I imagined him standing now, one hand on the mic, the other tucked in his pocket. His tie slightly loosened, face warm with a few glasses of wine and the glow of the evening. And I imagined what he said. How proud he was. How beautiful she looked. How watching her grow into the woman she is today had been the honor of a lifetime. I imagined her face as he spoke, soft, teary, lit from within by his words. There was a time she used to look at me that way. And then he would say something about love, about trust, about what it means to build a life together. A quote from a book he never finished reading. A line from a poem he thought sounded wise. He was always good at that, pulling meaning from places most people never thought to look. I wondered if he would mention me just once, not by name, not even directly, just a glance in my direction, a nod to the years that weren't easy, a quiet recognition that she hadn't become who she was alone. But the longer I watched, the more I realized he wouldn't, and she wouldn't expect him to. There was no place for me in the story they were telling. I imagined the chair at the head table, where I should have been, where I had once imagined sitting, napkin folded neatly on my lap, smiling politely, clapping after each speech, maybe even standing to give a short toast myself, something gentle, brief, the kind of toast you write weeks in advance and revise over tea. But my seat was filled now, or simply erased. And no one asked why. There are many ways to erase a person. Silence is one of them. Celebration, another. And as they raised their glasses, I held nothing in mine. Not bitterness, not envy, just stillness. I closed the curtain halfway, enough to soften the view, but not block it entirely. I didn't want to turn away, not completely. A part of me still needed to witness it, even if only from a distance. The next speaker stood. The crowd laughed. She leaned against her husband's arm and smiled. And I stayed in my room, a mother, a shadow, a witness to a toast meant for someone else. I read it again, though I had promised myself IWOULDN single quotes. It was late now. The lights outside had dimmed. The music had shifted into slower rhythms, and the laughter had become occasional instead of constant. I sat by the window, the envelope unfolded across my lap. The letters smoothed flat as if the paper itself would somehow give up more than the ink it held. There hadn't been a signature. just a first initial R. But I knew who it was. Rebecca, my sister. We hadn't spoken in almost 7 years. A disagreement that began small and turned slow and sharp. She had a way of placing her words like pins in fabric, just enough pressure to hold you in place, but never so much that you could accuse her of piercing anything. We had drifted, not with anger, but with precision. 1,000 tiny choices, none dramatic, but all final dot. And now, here she was, slipping into my daughter's wedding in the form of a letter, not to me, but to her. Addressed and delivered in private, waiting, silently in a hotel hallway for someone else to read first. She had written about Daniel, about our past, about the pieces I had protected my daughter from, not out of shame, but because a child shouldn't carry their mother's weight before their own legs are steady. And in the final paragraph, she wrote, "Your mother did what she thought was right, but she never let you choose what to remember." And then the last line, "I just thought you should know there's another version of her." That sentence, over and over again. There's another version of her, as if I were a story to be revised. As if memory were something that belonged to whoever picked up the pen next. I had not responded to Rebecca's messages over the years. She had sent 2 emails after our last conversation, one sharp, one smooth. I replied to neither. Silence had been easier than confrontation. And I had told myself that distance would keep the peace intact. But peace, it turned out, can be broken even by an envelope. I leaned back in the chair, listening to the muffled sound of a slow song below. My daughter was likely dancing now, her hands resting lightly on his shoulders, his chin tucked near her temple. And maybe she felt peace in that moment. Maybe she felt clarity. Maybe she believed that knowing more of me made her closer to herself. But I had not hidden out of fear. I had hidden out of necessity. There are things you don't say to your daughter at 12, or 16, or even 26. You don't tell her that love can unravel a woman if she doesn't guard her edges. You don't tell her that being kind and being safe are not always the same thing. You don't tell her that her father's silence wasn't an absence of love, but a refusal to grow. And you don't tell her that your sister, your only sister, once stood in the same room as the man who broke you, still asked why you couldn't make it work. I folded the letter again, not because it deserved neatness, but because I did. I placed it inside its envelope, sealed not with glue, but with a press of my fingers. A gesture of completion, not forgiveness, not yet, but finality. I would not respond to Rebecca. Not this time either, but I would remember that line. There's another version of her. Perhaps that's true. There are always other versions. The ones we show, the ones we protect, the ones people build when we're no longer around to defend the truth. But I am still here, and I remember. Every version. The one who stayed up all night when her daughter had the flu. The one who taught her to drive in an empty parking lot with her hand always near the emergency brake. The one who cut coupons for ballet shoes and smiled through parent nights alone. The one who kissed her forehead before every exam. The one who answered the phone at 2 a.m. even after they stopped living under the same roof. All those versions were real, even if they weren't. Written in someone else's letter, especially because they weren't. I placed the envelope at the bottom of my suitcase, under the shawl, beneath the shoes I never wore. Out of sight, but not erased. Because the version of me that mattered was still sitting upright in that room. Not broken, just awake. They had tossed it hours ago. The bouquet, a carefully tied bundle of flowers crafted by hand, delivered with fanfare. Photographed from every angle. It had once been cradled against a bodice, then lifted in triumph, then thrown into a crowd of eager hands. I hadn't seen it fly through the air, but I had seen what happened next. After the applause, after the scramble of girls pretending not to care too much, after the laughter and cheers and the camera flash catching someone's surprise, someone had set it down, not on a pedestal, not in water, just on a table near the back, beside a half-empty flute of sparkling wine and a discarded napkin with lipstick on the edge. Forgotten. In a way, most things are forgotten when the next moment demands more attention than the last. I didn't go to retrieve it. I only passed it later when I came to return my room key, moving through the quiet hallway near the ballroom entrance. Most of the guests had already moved outside where lights strung between trees blinked softly like tired eyes. Music had slowed to something almost nostalgic. It's the kind of song that asks people to lean close, not spin fast. But the bouquet was still there, alone. I paused a moment, not out of sentiment, just stillness. The flowers were slightly bruised now, petals curling at the edges, the white rose at the center beginning to brown where it had once opened in perfect symmetry. Ribbons limp, the stems no longer glistening green but dry, like something just beginning to stiffen with time. I could have picked it up. No. One was watching, no one would have noticed, but I didn't. Because it wasn't mine. It had never been mine. And something about its placement left there, unnoticed, felt like a punctuation mark on the day. Not an exclamation, not a question, just a pause. A soft end to a story I didn't write. I wondered who had caught it. Who had smiled for the camera, pretending she believed in old superstitions about love and order and fate. I wondered if she still held it for a while, clutching it as people took photos, or if she handed it off quickly. Before returning to her drink, I wondered if my daughter had noticed where it ended up. I doubted it. She had other things to hold. I kept walking. The hotel lobby was dim now. The staff behind the desk spoke in low tones, and the late-night guests moved slower, their dresses held in one hand, heels clicking with less urgency. A man in a dark suit nodded as he passed me, but said nothing. In the elevator, I stood alone. I thought about flowers. How they're made to be admired, then discarded. How something so full of attention in the morning becomes background by nightfall. It isn't tragic. It's just the way things go. Beauty fades. Ribbons unravel. People stop reaching for what they once caught. Back in my room, I poured a glass of water and sat by the window again. The night outside was mostly still. Just the hum of late celebration below, a few voices, a laugh, the quiet clink of silverware being cleared on the dresser. The second keepsake box sat untouched. I placed my glass beside it and closed my eyes. There had been no apology, no sudden knock at the door, no explanation, just a day that had moved forward, without pause, and a bouquet left behind. I pictured it one last time, not in someone's hands, not lifted high, not photographed. Just resting on a table no one would return to. Petals softening. Ribbons slack. Beauty intact, but fading. Some part of me understood. Not everything dropped is broken. Some things are. Simply set down. And never picked up again. I left the door unlocked. Not out of carelessness, but hoped it was late now. The hallway outside my room had gone quiet. No more hurried steps. No laughter spilling under door frames. Just the low hum of the elevator in the distance, moving like a heartbeat through a building that had seen too many promises and too few explanations. I had changed out of the dress hours earlier, folded it carefully, laid it across the chair. The corsage had wilted completely now. One of the petals had fallen and curled at the edge of the table. I didn't move it. I just watched it, as if it might do something else. The suitcase was mostly packed. The letter still sealed now, again rested beside it. And beside that, the keepsake box I hadn't delivered. I had told myself I'd leave it outside her door quietly early in the morning, before anyone stirred. But I hadn't moved. I hadn't left this chair, because I was still waiting for the knock. Not the dramatic kind. Not the crying at the door, middle of the night kind. Just the soft, almost uncertain knock of someone who wasn't sure what to say. It came anyway. A daughter's knock. Just a tap, a pause, a presence. But it never came. Instead, time passed in the small ways it does in hotel rooms. A thermostat shifting by a single degree, A shadow from the hallway, light rising and falling across the carpet. The ticking of something faint. Inside the wall. It's too slow to be noticed unless everything else is still. I tried to imagine what I would say if she did knock. Would I open the door slowly, as if afraid to frighten her off? Would I smile gently, say nothing, just step aside and let her in? Would I reach for her hand? Or would I stay still, waiting for her to speak first? I thought about that too much. Rehearsed it. Changed the details. But it didn't matter because the hallway stayed empty. And silence made its home on both sides of the door. I wondered if she knew how long I'd sat here. If some part of her paused near my room on the way to hers. If she slowed her steps outside my door, held her breath, then moved on. I wondered if her new husband had asked her, gently, whether she should talk to me. If he offered a comforting hand on her shoulder, she shook her head, not now, maybe later, maybe never. Or if she didn't think of me at all, not in cruelty, not in anger, just in distance. Sometimes the absence of a gesture is louder than anything said aloud. A knock would have meant, I still see you. No knock meant, I've rewritten this day without you. There was no blame in my heart by then. Just the slow settling of something that had been waiting to fall. A quiet resignation that didn't sting, but rested somewhere beneath the ribs. I reached over and turned off the lamp. The window let in enough light. The outline of the trees, the faint pattern of leaves dancing against the curtain. Somewhere down below, a late conversation stirred near the garden. Two people walking slowly, voices low. A last drink. A last laugh. I thought of all the times I had answered her knocks. At 4. When she had a bad dream. At 11. When she had questions she couldn't ask anyone else. At 17. When the world had disappointed her for the first time. I had always opened the door. Now, for the first time, I had left it open for her, and she had chosen not to walk through. There was no anger in that realization, just space. A new shape to learn around. I poured the last of the water into the glass and set it on the nightstand. Then I folded the shawl, smoothed the edge of the envelope. And gently, without sound, I clicked the lock into place. Morning came without drama. No final knock. No note slipped under my door in return. Just soft sunlight creeping over the patterned carpet and the mechanical hum of the air unit shifting to a news cycle. I sat up slowly, my back stiff from a night spent half sitting in the armchair. The kind of sleep that isn't sleep at all, just waiting with your eyes closed. I had booked the early flight home, before the reception. Before the bouquet toss. Before I knew what the day would become. And I didn't change it. Not after the scream, not after the silence, not after the unopened box stayed unopened, and the letter changed the shape of the day. I moved slowly, not from sadness, just caution. The way people move when they're trying not to wake something that might still break. The shawl I draped over the chair was cool to the touch. I folded it carefully, placed it into the suitcase. The corsage had crumbled. I left it. One small mess I didn't need to carry. The mirror held my face without judgment. Older than I felt the day before. Less made up than I would usually allow for travel. I ran a brush through my hair but didn't bother with foundation. Today, no one would be watching. I zipped the suitcase closed with one hand, holding it steady with the other. The envelope remained buried inside, beneath the dress, beneath the version of myself I had worn for the occasion. It would go home with me not as evidence, but as unfinished business. Some papers get filed. Some just get carried. I looked once. More around the room. The box meant for her still rested on the corner of the desk. I didn't take it with me, and I didn't leave a note. Let it be found or not. Let it mean something or nothing. I had said what I needed to say without writing a word. In the hallway, everything was quiet. Housekeeping carts parked against the wall, doors closed. A room or two with the faint sound of a shower behind them. I moved past the suite where the bridal party had prepared the day before. The door was closed now, a privacy sign dangling from the knob. I didn't pause. Downstairs, the lobby was bright and impersonal. The front desk clerk barely looked up. As I returned the room key, just a polite smile and a quiet safe travels. I nodded. That was all I needed. Outside, the air was cool, still holding on to the last of the early morning. A shuttle idled at the curb, its doors open, engine humming with the rhythm of departure. The driver lifted my suitcase easily, asked my name, and checked the list. I was on time. There were 5 others already on board, all quiet. A man with earbuds, couple whispering over a phone screen, a woman cradling a wide-brimmed hat in her lap, careful not to crush the ribbon. No one asked why I was alone. No one cared where I'd been. I took a seat near the back and leaned against the window. The hotel disappeared behind us, slow at first, then gone entirely as we turned onto the main road. I didn't look back. There would be photos posted later of the ceremony. Of the cake, of her dress, her smile. I would see them eventually, even if I didn't go looking. Someone would tag me, assuming I had been there in all the right ways. And I had, in a way. I had arrived early. I had brought the gift. I had dressed the part, smiled when it still seemed safe to smile. And when it was time to go, I had gone without. A seen dot without needing to be seen. At the airport, I moved through security like someone who belonged. No questions, no delays. Just the quiet confirmation that the name on my ticket still matched the woman standing in her shoes at the gate. I sipped coffee and folded my boarding pass in half, then in half again. The sun rose a little higher. Someone behind me laughed. Too loud. A gate agent called for a final boarding group, and when it was my turn, stepped forward without hesitation. The flight I hadn't changed was now ready to leave, and so was I. I had typed it out 3 times. The first was right after. The plane landed. My fingers still cold from the cabin air, eyes stinging not from tears, but from the sharp fluorescent light overhead. I sat in the back corner of the arrivals lounge, phone in hand, watching other people reunite. Hugs, handshakes, arms raised in recognition. And I typed, I hope the day was beautiful. I'm home safe. Then I deleted it. It felt too clean, too distant. Like something you'd say to a stranger after borrowing a coat. The second time was that evening, after I unpacked. The dress had been placed gently back in its garment bag. The shawl folded into its drawer. The suitcase still rested near the door, half-sipped, holding things I wasn't ready to sort through. I sat on the edge of the bed and typed again. I wish things had gone differently. I love you. I stared at that one for a long time. The words looked small. Not because they weren't true, but because they couldn't contain what I meant. There were no words for that hallway. It's no way to fold everything unsaid into a sentence short enough for a phone screen delete. The third time was the next morning. I'd made tea, as always. The kitchen was still. Familiar, my hands remembered. Every drawer. The cup she'd painted in 3rd grade still sat behind the sugar canister. A faded rainbow and her name spelled in crooked letters. I held it while the water boiled. And after I sat down, I typed again. I'm here. When you're ready. But I didn't send that one either, because I wasn't sure she would be. And I wasn't sure I was the phone screen dimmed in my hand. I didn't cry. I didn't whisper anything into the silence. I just placed the phone face down and folded my hands in my lap. Some messages aren't meant to be sent in words. Some take shape in the pauses between conversations, in the space that opens when you stop trying to force clarity. She knew where to find me. She always had. Whether she remembered that now was a different matter entirely. I thought about that morning, her wedding day. How I'd helped pin her veil, smoothed the back of her gown, watched her face shift in the mirror as she rehearsed her smile. How everything felt like a beginning, until it WASN single quotes T, until it shattered with 7 words. Shouted through a door I still hadn't told anyone. Not friends, not coworkers. I hadn't given them the soft, edited version of the story. I hadn't asked for validation, hadn't posted a photo, hadn't joined the online chorus of congratulations. I'd stepped out of the narrative quietly, entirely, and now, back in my home, surrounded by the quiet comfort of things I had chosen over a lifetime, I waited not for a call, not for an apology, just for the feeling to pass, the need to explain myself, the need to be understood, the need to send anything at all. Later that afternoon, opened the keepsake box that I'd originally bought for him. The one with the round floral pattern? I placed a few things inside the program. Its corner of the ribbon from the corsage, the folded letter. The unsent message stayed in my head. Maybe that's where it belonged. Not everything needs to arrive. Some things are only meant to be carried. She might text one day, she might not. But if she did, I knew what I would say. Something quiet, something real, something not typed out 3 times, but spoken once, without hesitation. I was always there. Even when I left, the house was quiet again. The kind of quiet that settles not because nothing is happening, but because everything already has. I stood by the window in the kitchen, the late afternoon sun falling across the countertop in the same pattern it had for years. Dust caught the light. The kettle warmed slowly. Nothing urgent remained, and yet there she was. Everywhere in the taped art still curled on the corner of the refrigerator. In the shallow dent on the floor where her chair used to rock too hard. In the hall, mirror, where for years I'd adjusted the collar of her school uniform before she left for the day. That mirror had always caught both our faces, mine patient, hers in motion. She used to love brushing her hair there. Used to ask if her part was straight, if her sleeves were rolled evenly. She looked grown enough. Now she was grown. But I wasn't sure what version of me she had carried into that adulthood. Did she remember the mother who hummed while folding laundry? Who drew stars on lunch napkins? Who always answered late-night texts with, "I'm up even if I wasn't"? Or would she hold on to something else now? A woman who made a scene? Who ruined everything? Who left early? Who didn't explain herself? I don't know when that shift begins, when the version of you they keep becomes fixed. I suppose you don't get to choose. It's made of moments they remember clearly and ones you don't realize mattered. And sometimes it's rewritten by someone else entirely. The letter, the silence, scream. They had rearranged me in her memory before I could speak for myself. I made tea and sat in the same kitchen chair I'd sat in when she first told me about him. When she'd said shyly, "He makes me feel like I can breathe easier." I remembered how I smiled, even as something tightened in my chest. Not from doubt, but from knowing how fragile ease can be, how quickly it shifts into something heavier. I had wanted the best for her. Every mother does. But we don't always know how to give it. Sometimes we protect too much. Sometimes we speak too little. And sometimes we forget they grow into their own stories, not the ones we imagine for them. She would carry her version of me forward now. It's the one she chose to see. And I would carry mine. The one shaped by night feedings and science projects. By scraped knees and whispered fears. By years of showing up again and again, even when the door didn't open. Maybe in time, our versions would meet again. Maybe someday she'd call. Not with regret, not with apology, but with time in her voice. It's a kind of time that allows softness to return. Or maybe not. Maybe the distance would stay. And if it did, I'd still be here. Still setting 2 plates at holidays, just in case. Still keeping her childhood things boxed carefully in the attic, because I can't seem to throw them away. Still writing her name in the corner of cards I never send. Because even if she forgets my story, I won't forget hers. Not the day she first walked. Or the time she broke her arm and refused to cry until the cast was on. Not the look on her face when she got into college. Not the way she hugged me before prom, nervous and full of hope. Those things live in me, even if they don't live in her version anymore. The tea had gone cold. I stood and poured it out gently, watching the pale swirl disappear down the drain. Outside, the wind had shifted. The trees moved in a slow, forgiving rhythm, as if nothing could be rushed, and for the first time in days, I breathed without bracing for the sound of her voice, because it was quiet now, and in the quiet, I remained not as she saw me, but as I am.